Вітаємо в програмі «Контакт» головного керівника компанії Black Iron Мета Сімпсона, яка інвестувала понад $90 мільйонів в Україну і готова продовжити розбудову країни. Black Iron – канадська компанія, що спеціалізується на розвідці та видобутку залізної руди, зокрема на Шеменівському родовищі в Кривому Розі. З моменту виборів у США, коли став очевидним виграш Дональда Трампа, акції компанії виросли на 20%, що свідчить про стабільність і перспективність її інвестицій у регіоні.
Дорогі глядачі, як заповіджено, ми тут в студіях Black Iron і головний керівник організації інвестиційної фірми Black Iron тут Matt Simpson. Matt, welcome again. It's been a year and we're doing our, how do I say, annual checkup on what Black Iron is doing.
Well, thank you for having me back on the show.
Thank you. Now, you announced just recently a new relationship with Anglo American, and I would like to read what it says here, that you wish to, in the Shemanivske iron ore project in Kryvyi Rih, that you will not only help to produce ultra high grade iron, but also to help Ukrainian industry recover after years of conflict. That's what all of us want to hear, but it is kind of interesting or concerning investment in Ukraine during a time of war. How do you, as a CEO, how do you see this kind of a perspective, and how do you make your judgment calls based on the fact that there is a war in Ukraine?
Look, with our project, it was important to do two things for investors. The first was to put the company on solid financial footing during this time of war. And the second was to show investors a pathway to how could this project get funded for construction once there's peace in the country. So we ran a very competitive process, and I was actually happily surprised that we had almost 9 companies participate in that process, out of which we selected Anglo American. And if you're not familiar with Anglo American, this is one of the biggest mining companies in the world. And it was quite material for us to close this transaction, not only during the time of war in Ukraine, but also during a time when BHP, the biggest mining company in the world, was actually trying to buy Anglo American.
So how do you negotiate with a company that's being bought out at the same time?
it was a really tricky negotiation. I mean, to be really direct with you, we even had a couple of people that were on Anglo American's negotiating team that were actually let go during the transaction. So it was a bit concerning on would we actually be able to see this through from both sides. I think in Anglo American's case, they truly believe that the future is all about high purity iron because it substantially reduces the emissions that are generated in the production of steel. I think we all believe that the war in Ukraine will come to a head, hopefully this year. So we believe the timing is right for them to move forward, and they did make an initial investment of $2.6 million US into the company, which again puts us on solid footing. And then we're going to use that money to renew our permits with the hope that, again, peace comes very soon, and then we'll be able to move quickly into construction.
Now, what was the value per share of your investment in Ukraine prior to the war?
Prior to the war, our last raise was done at around 40 cents per share. And I think last year when you and I spoke, we were sitting at around 5-6 cents per share.
Yes, I remember 6, yeah.
And then today, we're sitting closer to around 13 cents a share. So I think people are starting to get very optimistic and excited that things are starting to turn here quickly.
Well, that's kind of nice to hear. Doubling, the recessed value, I think, is a great achievement. But also in one of your statements, you said, or your press secretary said that your shares rose as a result of of the announcement of Donald Trump's presidency or the winning of the presidency. How does that all fit in, and how does that affect your shares, or why does it affect your shares in such a positive way?
Yeah, whether you like or don't like Donald Trump, I think people believe whether he was elected, which was the case, or whether it was Kamala Harris, that they would look to seek to bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine. And in our case, that's really what's held the share price back in the company, is that investors are concerned about how long is my money going to be tied up before it can be put forward towards actually building this project into an operating asset. So when people see material events such as Donald Trump making comments about how I'm going to bring this war to an end within one day, that gets people excited. Now, I personally think it's going to take longer than one day, and I think we all know that there's been a lot of discussions that have been going on behind the scenes. But I do believe that the timing now is right for there to be peace in the country and for everyone to be able to now move forward with their lives and move on with investment and rebuilding the country.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned as a hindrance or impediment to investment or into business growth was obviously the war that you've already sort of overcame, at least in your comments. The other one is government bureaucracy. Now, how does that look today in comparison to last year? Did the processes that you were waiting for, did they come through? Is it better now than it was before? What's the status on that for, let's say, investors even in other businesses?
Certainly. So I think one of the most important pieces of legislation for new investors into Ukraine is what's called the Special Investment Agreement Law. This was originally introduced, I believe, around 2021, but then it was revised in late 2023. And this is a law that does a number of things for investors. It provides you with exemption from value-added tax on the import of new equipment for construction. It can include the transfer of government-owned land, connection of government utilities, and in some cases, even a tax break on corporate taxes. The legislation revisions that were put in place, in our case, did have a negative impact because one of the key changes to that legislation was that the act of force majeure does not qualify as a reason for a contract not to move forward. So this is very strange because almost normally around the world, when you say the word force majeure, the first thing that comes to people's mind is war.
Yes.
And that a contract can't come into place during a time of war. The reason this is a bit problematic for Black Iron is that the land that we're seeking in order to build our processing plant, waste rock and tailings impoundment, is owned by the central government, but it's being used by the Ministry of Defense as a firing range. So we don't need to have that land now, but what we do need is to have clear legal contracts that say that once the war is ended and the Ministry of Defense no longer requires that land in part will be transferred to Black Iron so we can then use it to build our mine. So coming back to the legislation, the problem is if you're to sign the contract now, by law, the land needs to be transferred within 6 months. So it's very problematic for the government to transfer the land within 6 months, knowing that there's still an ongoing war when it's needed by the Ministry of Defense.
So a little bit of a catch-22, but like time actually resolves this.
It does. I mean, in our case, we're really going to be looking forward to strong indications that the war is coming to a head, immediately submit our application at that point in time, and then it should clear such that we can then get the land transferred within the legally allowed.
Now, Matt, how about another question? The need or the value of iron ore for Ukraine or for whomever you're producing it for. What is it? Like who is going to be your customer for this iron ore that you're going to
So
do?
iron ore is the main building block for steel. And steel is used for so many different applications in everyday life. Whether today you used utensils to eat your breakfast or at lunchtime, likely they were made of steel. Many cases, not so much today, but normally the chair that people might be sitting on when they're watching this video likely has a component of steel in it. But more importantly, coming to Ukraine, when we look at things like apartment buildings, we look at schools, we look at bridges, these are all going to require a tremendous amount of steel. So what better than to have the steel that's used in part to rebuild the country to come from a new mine that's going to create new jobs, new tax revenues, and also a halo effect for other investors to get excited about coming into Ukraine.
To what extent, I don't know if I know you attended the Rebuild Ukraine concept exhibit here last year. Don't know if you participated this year, but it seems that there is a groundswell of support for the concept of rebuilding Ukraine over and above even what you're doing. Are you feeling that from other businesses too?
There's a lot of interest, and I'd say that the initial wave is mostly coming from government-backed agencies. So these include like the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the European Investment Bank. Those are going to be the earlier movers into the country, and there are some groups that are investing now. That, I think, would then be followed more by private industry. But for the economy in Ukraine to be self-sufficient, we really need to have private industry come in. That's generally how markets around the world work is, government can only do so much. It can kind of subsidize and support, but it's not going to create momentum. Whereas with private industry, and in particular coming back to Black Iron situation, having such a well-known investor as Anglo American put money in, and then this project be successfully constructed, it's going to provide more confidence for other investors that they too can be successful.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for explaining the concepts and the forward thinking of Black Iron. Дорогі глядачі, це була розмова з керівником головним фірми міжнародної Black Iron і їхньої інвестиції в Україні. Вертаємося до наступної частини нашої програми відразу після цих реклам.